The U.S. Supreme Court has struck down President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs that he pursued under a law meant for use in national emergencies, rejecting one of his most contentious assertions of his authority in a ruling with major implications for the global economy. The justices, in a 6-3 ruling, upheld a lower court's decision that the Republican's president's use of a 1977 law exceeded his authority. The Supreme Court reached its conclusion in a legal challenge by businesses affected by the tariffs and the 12 U.S. states, most of them Democratic, governed against Trump's unprecedented use of this law to unilaterally impose the import taxes. And for more on this, let's now take you live to Washington, D.C., and that's where we find SABC News correspondent Nick Harper, and he joins us now live. Nick, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. I mean, let's start off here. This is a major setback coming in for Donald Trump, and that follows that Supreme Court ruling. What does this mean from a global perspective?
Yeah, an incredible ruling for the US president, a real blow to him, his presidency, but also tariffs, the centre plank of his economic and foreign policy over the last year. I'm outside the US Supreme Court here in Washington, D.C., where the Supreme Court justices, 9 of them, just over a couple of hours ago, handed down that ruling against the US president. And the implications, the ramifications, all of that will be felt in the coming days and weeks to come, because this will send shockwaves around the world, because as well as upending the whole economic agenda for the US administration, it means that those tariffs that have been in place against South Africa and every other country around the world, many of them will in theory now disappear. The ruling specifically is about the Liberation Day tariffs, so-called, that Donald Trump announced in April last year, those reciprocal tariffs where different countries had to pay different amounts depending on the scale of the trade imbalance, as the US president saw it, between the US and their country. Those now get removed, but sector-specific tariffs on things like steel, aluminium, cars, pharmaceuticals, those remain in place. And really what it now means for countries, foreign governments around the world, they will be wondering what comes next. Will they be in line for refunds? Because in theory there are refunds totaling almost $200 billion that the US government will now have to pay back. Some of those will go to other countries, but the vast majorities could end up in the pockets of US companies and consumers, because about 95% of all of those higher costs over the last year have, as expected, been passed on to US companies and consumers who've paid more for importing goods for other countries. There will be that scramble for refunds, but also a scramble from the administration to work out how to impose a plan B. We have heard from the US president they have a contingency plan, and that will likely be imposing tariffs using a different legal basis that gets around the Supreme Court decision that was imposed earlier today.
And Nick, I mean, this ruling comes at a time when the US is heading towards its midterm elections. What role will this play for the upcoming elections?
Yeah, that's right. Midterm elections in November, this could have a very important bearing on it, because it is an issue that many lawmakers have been speaking out against on the basis that they have heard from their constituents in their cities, counties, states right across the US, and many of them have been unhappy with the higher costs that they have had to pay as a result of those tariffs, at a time when inflation has already been running hot, and we have seen the cost of living gradually increasing over the last few years. It is something that the Trump administration has been trying to grapple with, this idea of affordability, and it is why the US president just a few weeks ago said that he would be embarking on a tour of cities, going to a different one each week, one a week from now until the midterms, to push this message that he is a president that is helping to lower costs, even though the economic data suggests differently. Now, with this tariff ruling out the way, it could mean that some voters are now more favourable to the US president if they see costs reduce in the coming months. But it may not happen that quickly. And as I mentioned, it may be that the US administration just looks to impose tariffs in slightly different ways. So those high costs may still remain. But it's certainly something that both Republicans and Democrats can talk about in the run-up to the midterms and hope that they can propose an argument that betters their party, betters their case for getting re-elected in the midterm elections. And bear in mind, Donald Trump is not on the ballot in the midterm elections, but many lawmakers are. And in many ways, the midterms are often seen as a referendum on the president's policies and how voters view he's done during the first 2 years of his term.
And Nick, let's talk about some of the reaction coming in from the US. What are the Americans saying about this Supreme Court ruling? At the same time, have we heard any word from the White House?
Yeah, from the White House, Donald Trump himself reacting quite violently earlier. He was in the middle of a meeting with governors, Democratic and Republican governors at the White House. He was passed a bit of paper by his aides, a bit of paper that detailed the decision of the Supreme Court. He read that, and we are told that he said that the ruling was a disgrace. He then took one more question from the governors before abruptly ending the meeting, saying that he had to decide next steps and decide how to react to the Supreme Court decision. Lots of reaction, though, from some businesses, a consortium of about 800 small businesses, saying that they are now pushing for fast and efficient refunds from the US administration. One interesting reaction is from the former vice president, the vice president under Donald Trump during his first term, Mike Pence, who has spoken out against the tariffs. He has cheered this decision from the Supreme Court, but some Republican lawmakers certainly unhappy with what they're seeing. There is pushback against this decision because, bear in mind, this is at the moment a conservative-leaning Supreme Court. 6 out of the 9 justices conservative-leaning, 3 of them appointed by Donald Trump in his first term, and 2 out of those 3 ruled against him with this decision.
All right, Nick, thank you so much for that update. That's SABC News correspondent there, Nick Harper, in Washington, D.C., giving us the latest reaction to that ruling from the Supreme Court.